You know, there's something peculiar that happens when you begin to look beneath the surface of things. When you start to question the assumptions that everyone else seems to accept without a second thought. When you can't help but notice the vast humming silence that sits underneath all our noise and chatter. You become, in a sense, a stranger in your own world. Let me put it to you this way. Imagine you're at a party. Everyone's talking about the usual things, their jobs, their plans, what they're going to buy next, who said what to who. And you're standing there, glass in hand, but you're not really there at all. You're watching it all happen as if from a great distance. You're seeing the whole scene like a play, and you can't help but wonder, what is all this really about? What are we doing here, really? And in that moment, you feel utterly alone. Not because you dislike these people, not because you think you're superior, but because you're seeing something they're not seeing, and you can't unsee it. This is the predicament of the deep thinker. The person who can't stop asking questions, who can't accept the comfortable narratives we tell ourselves about who we are and what we're doing here. And it's a curious kind of loneliness, because it's not about being physically alone. You can be surrounded by people and feel it more acutely than ever. It's a loneliness that comes from seeing the transparency of things, the fundamental uncertainty we're all floating in, while everyone else seems content to pretend it's solid ground. Now, why does this happen? Why is it that the more deeply you think, the more isolated you tend to feel? Well, let's start with this. Most of human life is organized around agreements. Agreements about what matters, what's real, what we should care about, how we should spend our time. These agreements are invisible, mostly. They're the water we swim in. We call them culture, society, common sense. And they're useful, don't misunderstand me. They allow us to coordinate, to build things together, to have conversations that make sense. But here's the thing. These agreements are just that, agreements. They're not ultimate truths. They're constructs, stories we tell, games we've decided to play. And the deep thinker is someone who somehow stepped outside the circle of agreement, even if just for a moment, and seen it for what it is. And once you've seen that, once you've glimpsed that, all these solid-seeming things are actually quite fluid, quite arbitrary, quite strange. Well, you can't fully re-enter the circle. You're always a little bit outside now, looking in. Think of it this way. Most people are actors who've forgotten they're in a play. They're completely absorbed in their roles. They believe the script is reality itself. But the deep thinker is the actor who's suddenly become aware that it's a play, who can see the props, the stage, the audience. And now they're trying to act alongside people who are still completely identified with their characters. And it creates this odd dissonance. You're not speaking the same language anymore, even though you're using the same words. And there's something else that happens too. When you think deeply about existence, about consciousness, about the nature of reality, you inevitably come face to face with the great mysteries, the unanswerable questions, the fundamental uncertainty of everything. You realize that nobody really knows what's going on here. Not the scientists, not the priests, not the philosophers, not your parents. We're all making it up as we go along, constructing meaning in what might very well be a meaningless universe, or a universe whose meaning is so far beyond our comprehension that we might as well call it meaningless. Now, for most people, this realization, if they allow themselves to have it at all, is terrifying. So they quickly cover it back up with beliefs, with certainties, with the comforting narratives provided by their culture or religion or ideology. But the deep thinker sits with that uncertainty, stares into it, sometimes even finds a strange kind of peace in it. And this creates a gulf. Because when you're comfortable with not knowing, when you're at home in the mystery, you become very difficult to relate to for people who desperately need to know, who need answers, who need certainty. Let me tell you what I mean more concretely. You sit down with someone and they tell you about their 5-year plan, their career goals, all the things they're going to achieve and acquire. And there's nothing wrong with having goals, but you can't help noticing that they're speaking as if the future is something solid, something guaranteed, as if they'll be the same person in 5 years wanting the same things. And you're aware, painfully aware, of the absolute contingency of it all. How a single phone call, a chance meeting, a sudden illness, a shift in perspective could render all those plans utterly irrelevant. And you can't say this, of course. You can't point it out without seeming morbid or negative or like you're trying to rain on their parade. So you nod and smile, but inside you're feeling that familiar distance opening up again. Or someone tells you they've found the answer. They've discovered the right religion, the right political ideology, the right diet, the right guru, the right system that explains everything. And you can see how much comfort they're deriving from this, how much their certainty is protecting them from the anxiety of not knowing. And part of you even envies it. But you can't join them in their certainty because you've seen how many different certainties there are in the world, all contradicting each other, all absolutely convinced they're right. You've seen how certainty itself is just another way of managing anxiety. And so again, you're on the outside, unable to participate fully in their relief. The deep thinker, you see, has developed a kind of double vision. They can see both the surface and what lies beneath it. They can participate in the everyday world of jobs and mortgages and dinner parties, but they're simultaneously aware of the vast mystery that contains all of it. It's like being able to see both the movie and the screen it's projected on at the same time. And this double vision is extraordinarily difficult to share with others. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. This loneliness, this sense of alienation that deep thinkers feel, it's pointing to something profound. It's not a bug, it's a feature. Because what you're actually experiencing is the fundamental aloneness of consciousness itself. You see, in a very deep sense, we are all alone. Each of us is trapped, if you want to put it that way, inside our own skull, behind our own eyes, experiencing our own private version of reality. We can never truly know what it's like to be another person. We can never escape the confines of our own perspective. But most people don't feel this acutely because they're so identified with their social role, with their relationships, with the stories they tell about themselves. They feel connected because they're part of the agreement, part of the collective dream. The deep thinker, though, has loosened their identification with all of that. They've pulled back from the collective dream even just a little, and in doing so, they've become more aware of their essential aloneness. But, and this is crucial, this aloneness is not a tragedy. It's not something to be overcome or fixed. It's the very nature of what you are. You are awareness, having a particular experience, looking out from a particular point of view. And that point of view is absolutely unique. Nobody has ever had it before, and nobody will ever have it again. In this sense, you are utterly, completely alone. And this is not sad, it's extraordinary. It means you're having an experience that has never been had before in the entire history of the universe. The loneliness the deep thinker feels is actually homesickness for this truth. It's the discomfort of being almost but not quite aware of your true nature. You're standing at the threshold, you see. You've seen enough to know that you're not who you thought you were, that the world isn't what you thought it was. But you haven't quite fully stepped through. You're caught between the world of conventional understanding and something else, something vaster and stranger and more real. And this is why deep thinkers are often drawn to each other with such intensity when they do meet, because there's this instant recognition, here's someone else who sees it. Here's someone else who's standing at the same threshold. There's a tremendous relief in that. It's like you've been speaking a foreign language all your life, and suddenly you meet someone else who speaks it fluently. You don't have to explain, don't have to translate, don't have to pretend. You can just be. But here's the paradox. Even in those rare moments of connection with another deep thinker, you're still fundamentally alone, because you're still locked in your own experience, still seeing things through your particular lens. The other person can resonate with you, can mirror your insights back to you, can make you feel less crazy, but they can't actually be you. They can't have your experience. Nobody can. So what do you do with this? How do you live with this profound sense of separation? This awareness that you're fundamentally alone in your experience? Well, first, you stop trying to make it go away. You stop treating it as a problem to be solved. Because it isn't a problem, it's a fact. It's the structure of consciousness itself. Trying to escape your aloneness is like trying to escape your own shadow. It follows you everywhere because it's part of what you are. Second, you begin to investigate this aloneness more deeply. You sit with it. You feel into it. And as you do, something very strange starts to happen. The aloneness begins to transform. It stops feeling like isolation and starts feeling like solitude. And solitude, unlike loneliness, is rich. It's full. It's the place where you meet yourself most authentically. Because here's what you discover. When you're really alone, when you're not performing for anyone, not maintaining any image, not trying to be understood or accepted or validated, when all of that falls away, what's left? What remains when you're stripped of all your social roles and relationships and identities? What remains is pure awareness, pure being. The simple fact of existence before it gets complicated with all our stories about who we are and what we're supposed to be doing. And this awareness, this being, is completely sufficient unto itself. It doesn't need anything. It doesn't lack anything. It's whole and complete exactly as it is. This is what the mystics have been pointing to for thousands of years in different ways. This is what they mean when they talk about the self beyond the self. The consciousness that contains all experience but is itself untouched by experience. And the deep thinker in their loneliness is actually getting close to this realization. They're beginning to sense that their true nature is not their thoughts, not their feelings, not their personality, not their history, but something much more fundamental. Something that was never born and can never die. Something that is, in fact, never truly alone, because it is the very ground of being itself. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's stay with the practical reality of feeling alone in a world that doesn't understand how you think, because that's where most deep thinkers find themselves most of the time. Not in mystical realization, but in the ordinary struggle of trying to connect with others while feeling fundamentally different. Here's what I've observed. The deep thinker's loneliness is often compounded by a kind of subtle superiority complex. They think, I see things others don't see. I understand things others don't understand. I'm more aware, more awake, more conscious. And this creates even more separation, because now you're not just alone, you're alone and judging everyone else for not being as deep or as thoughtful as you are. But this is a trap. Because the moment you start thinking you're more evolved or more conscious than others, you've actually become less conscious. You've fallen into the ego's favorite game, which is making you special, making you superior. And the ego loves nothing more than spiritual pride, intellectual pride, the pride of understanding things others don't understand. The truth is that everyone is dealing with existence in their own way. The person who seems completely absorbed in mundane concerns, who never appears to question anything, they're navigating the mystery too. They've just chosen consciously or unconsciously to do it differently. They've decided, perhaps wisely, to focus on what they can control, what they can understand, what brings them comfort and connection. And there's a kind of wisdom in that too. You see, the deep thinker often makes the mistake of believing that thinking deeply is the highest form of engagement with life. But it isn't. It's just one form. There are people who engage with life through their bodies, through movement, through athletic excellence, and they might know things about existence that no amount of thinking could reveal. There are people who engage through relationships, through empathy, through the intricate dance of human connection, and they might understand dimensions of reality that the solitary thinker never encounters. There are people who engage through creativity, through art, through making things with their hands, and they might be in touch with sources of wisdom that bypass the intellect entirely. So the question isn't, why don't others think as deeply as I do? The question is, what am I missing by being so caught up in my own way of engaging with existence? Because here's another secret about loneliness. It's often a choice. Not a conscious choice necessarily, but a choice nonetheless. The deep thinker often withdraws from connection, because connection requires compromise. It requires meeting people where they are, speaking their language, caring about things that might seem trivial or superficial from a more cosmic perspective. And the deep thinker often can't be bothered. They're too busy contemplating the nature of reality to engage fully with the messy, mundane reality of human relationship. But this is where the real work begins. This is where thinking becomes living. Because it's one thing to understand intellectually that we're all manifestations of the same underlying consciousness, that separation is an illusion, that we're all in this together. It's quite another thing to actually live that understanding, to bring that realization down into the marketplace, into your relationships, into your daily interactions with ordinary people living ordinary lives. And when you do this, when you actually engage with others from a place of genuine curiosity and care, rather than from intellectual superiority, something wonderful happens. You discover that everyone, absolutely everyone, is dealing with the same fundamental questions you are. They just express it differently. The person worried about their retirement fund is really asking, will I be okay? Am I safe in this uncertain universe? The person obsessed with their appearance is really asking, am I worthy of love? Do I matter? The person chasing career success is really asking, what's my purpose? What am I here to do? These are the same questions the deep thinker asks, just dressed in different clothes. And when you can see through the surface differences to the underlying similarity, connection becomes possible again. Not the superficial connection of small talk and social niceties, but real connection, heart to heart, being to being. This is the resolution of the deep thinker's loneliness, if there is one. Not in finding other people who think exactly like you, though that's lovely when it happens, but in realizing that your deepest nature is not your thoughts at all. Your deepest nature is the awareness in which all thoughts arise, and that awareness is the same awareness looking out of every pair of eyes you've ever met. In other words, you're not alone because you can't be alone. You're made of the same stuff as everything else. You're the universe experiencing itself from this particular angle, in this particular way, for this particular moment. And so is everyone else. We're all angles of the same jewel, facets of the same infinite consciousness, waves on the same ocean. But you can't think your way to this realization. You can only be it. And that requires letting go of the very thing that made you feel special, your thoughts, your insights, your deep understanding. It requires a kind of death, actually. The death of the thinker, the death of the one who stands apart and observes and analyzes and understands. And what remains after that death? Just this. Just presence. Just the simple, obvious, unavoidable fact of being alive, being aware, being here. And in that presence there is no loneliness, because there's no longer anyone separate to be lonely. There's just the vast intimacy of existence meeting itself in every moment, in every encounter, in every breath. This is what you've been looking for all along. Not an answer to your loneliness, but the dissolution of the one who was lonely in the first place. The deep thinker who felt so alone was just a thought, after all. A very convincing thought, a very persistent thought, but a thought nonetheless. And thoughts come and go in the vast space of awareness, like clouds passing through the sky. The sky isn't lonely when the clouds are gone. It's just more obviously itself, infinite, open, clear. So feel your loneliness fully. Don't try to escape it or fix it or understand it away. Let it be there as vast and deep as it wants to be. And in that allowing, you might discover that what you thought was loneliness was actually just the feeling of being infinite, squeezed into a finite form, the feeling of being everything, pretending to be something, the cosmic homesickness of consciousness that has temporarily forgotten its own nature. And when you see that, really see it, the question of why deep thinkers feel alone becomes irrelevant. Because there are no deep thinkers, there are no shallow thinkers. There's just this eternal mystery, dancing with itself, playing hide and seek with itself, sometimes finding itself, sometimes losing itself, but always, always itself.
There comes a time, after all the seeking, the meditating, the searching for answers, when something peculiar happens. You wake up one morning and realize that you simply don't care to go on improving yourself. The drive that once pushed you forward to become better, wiser, more enlightened, seems to have vanished. It's as though the wind that filled your sails has suddenly stopped, leaving you adrift in a vast and silent sea. And for many people, this feels terribly wrong. You see, we are trained from birth to believe that life must always be about progress, that we are here to grow, to strive, to push upward toward some imagined summit. Even in spirituality, this same mentality sneaks in through the back door. We meditate to get somewhere, to reach enlightenment, to become pure, serene, and wise. But then one day, you notice something has changed. You no longer feel that fire. You no longer have the same hunger for books, for teachings, for goals. And immediately, the mind begins to panic. It whispers, something has gone wrong. You've lost your way. But has it? Or could it be that you are, for the first time, standing still long enough to feel where you actually are? What most people call a lack of motivation is not the failure of the path, it is the flowering of it. It is the moment when the seeker begins to disappear, when the very energy that once fueled the search dissolves because there is no longer anything to seek. You see, the self that wanted to awaken was part of the illusion all along. The ego was wearing the mask of a saint, pretending to strive for transcendence while secretly feeding on the idea of progress. And when that mask falls away, when the show is over, the ego dies, and with it, the constant need to fix, improve, and achieve. Of course, to the mind, this feels like death. It says, what's the point now? If nothing needs to be done, what am I supposed to do? But that question itself is the echo of the old pattern, the assumption that life must always have a mission, a reason, a grand meaning. The truth is far more subtle, far more ordinary, and because of that, it often feels empty at first. Imagine you have been climbing a mountain for years, sweating and struggling toward a shining peak. Every step was driven by the belief that when you reached the top, everything would make sense. But when you finally arrive, you discover there is no temple, no secret waiting, no grand revelation, only the wide, silent sky. The mind doesn't know what to do with that. It expected fireworks, angels, transformation. Instead, it finds stillness. And so people come down from the mountain thinking something went wrong. I lost my motivation, they say. But what they've really lost is their illusion. They've discovered that all along, the journey was not about arriving anywhere, but about seeing through the need to arrive. This is why, after awakening, many people feel detached from ordinary life. The games they used to play, success, improvement, ambition, no longer hold the same charm. The taste has gone out of it. They find themselves watching the world continue its restless movement and wonder, why doesn't it feel real anymore? But this detachment is not apathy, it is clarity. You are seeing through the play, not rejecting it. It's like watching a drama on stage while knowing it's only a performance. The difference is, you no longer take it so seriously. You no longer believe that you are the character struggling for a happy ending. And yet, this clarity can be disorienting. The ego thrived on purpose, on doing, on effort. Without those, it feels useless, naked. It begins to whisper, you've lost your spark. You're becoming lazy. But what is laziness? It is a word we use to condemn stillness. We have been so deeply conditioned to equate motion with meaning that we cannot imagine that doing nothing could be intelligent. Consider nature. The tree does not strain to grow, it unfolds. The river does not push itself to flow, it moves because of gravity. The clouds drift, the seasons change, and not one of them needs a motivational quote to do so. Their being is their doing. They do not divide the world into progress and stagnation. They simply are, and that is enough. So when you find yourself unmotivated after awakening, it may not be a problem to solve, but a lesson to learn. Life is inviting you to rediscover a deeper rhythm, one that does not depend on the whip of the ego. For the first time, you are allowed to rest, to breathe, to exist without striving. And that can feel terrifying because it's so unfamiliar. The mind, when faced with stillness, becomes restless. It begins to invent new goals. Perhaps I should start manifesting. Perhaps I should find my life purpose. Perhaps I should help others awaken. These are subtle disguises of the same old game. The ego does not care what it's chasing, so long as it's chasing something. But awareness has no need to chase. It watches the play of desire rise and fall like waves upon the sea. It doesn't resist them. but it doesn't follow them either. It sees that all movement, even spiritual movement, happens within the same vast stillness that you already are. This is the irony of awakening. The moment you realize that everything is already it, you also realize that there's nothing left to do. And that's precisely when the human mind feels most lost. It craves projects, definitions, purposes. It asks, but what now? As though existence itself were not enough. You must understand motivation belongs to the realm of becoming, but awakening belongs to the realm of being. The two operate on different frequencies. When you awaken, the machinery of becoming winds down. It doesn't mean you'll never move again. It means movement will no longer be born of lack. And perhaps that is the true lesson. Before awakening, you act because you believe something is missing. After awakening, you see that nothing was ever missing, and so your actions change their flavor. They become spontaneous, effortless, playful. But before this natural action returns, there is often a long silence, a spiritual winter. In that winter, you may feel uninspired, tired, or disconnected. But don't try to fix it. It is not a mistake. It is a cleansing. The old motives are dissolving so that new, purer ones can appear not from the mind, but from life itself. Think of it like the stillness before spring. The ground looks barren, the air cold, the trees lifeless, but beneath the surface, everything is quietly preparing to bloom. In the same way, when your motivation disappears, your being is preparing to act again, not from compulsion, but from harmony. The secret is patience. Let yourself be still. Let the silence do its work. You don't need to invent meaning. Meaning will return on its own when the time is right. Because, you see, true purpose is not chosen, it's revealed. It's not something you plan, but something you notice. And it always arises when the ego has finally grown quiet enough to hear it. So if you find yourself drifting, don't panic. You haven't lost your way. You've simply stepped off the treadmill of constant doing. The world may call it laziness. Wisdom calls it awakening. Be still long enough, and you will see there is nothing wrong with the absence of drive. It is the space through which a new kind of energy begins to move, one that does not push, but pulls. Not ambition, but inspiration, not pressure, but peace. And in that peace, life begins again, not as a project, but as a play. There is a moment after the long silence of awakening when life begins to move again, but it no longer moves the way it used to. The old urgency is gone. You are not driven by hunger anymore, yet somehow things still happen. Conversations appear, paths open, actions unfold. It is as if existence itself has taken over the steering wheel, and you are simply being carried. This is what the ancient sages called wu-wei, effortless action, the art of doing without forcing. It doesn't mean doing nothing. It means allowing the natural rhythm of things to move through you. When the ego stops interfering, when it stops shouting, "I must," then life begins to act on its own behalf. You may notice that you start to do things not because you should, but because they simply feel appropriate in the moment. There is no debate, no inner argument. The same way a bird doesn't plan to sing and yet sings, you find yourself speaking, creating, walking, helping, without any agenda behind it. Action becomes spontaneous, graceful, almost playful. At first, this can feel strange. We have spent so many years measuring worth by productivity that spontaneous action seems irresponsible. But in truth, the most natural work is done by those who have nothing to prove. When you are no longer seeking meaning, your every movement begins to express it. Think of the musician who stops performing to impress the crowd and instead plays for the sheer joy of sound. The melody that emerges from that state carries a depth no effort can produce. That is the same energy that returns after awakening, not ambition, but participation. You see, the problem with motivation, as the world understands it, is that it is always conditional. I must act in order to become. I must improve in order to deserve. But existence doesn't demand this bargain. The tree does not grow in order to earn sunlight. It grows because it is sunlight made visible. In the same way, when the illusion of separation fades, action becomes the natural radiance of being. When you realize this, life begins to flow again. Not because you make it flow, but because you stop standing in the way. You discover that inspiration arises like breathing, effortless, cyclical, renewing itself moment after moment. Yet even here, the mind sometimes returns with questions. If all is effortless, what about responsibility? What about discipline, goals? The world that still needs building. But understand, Wu Wei is not chaos, it is order deeper than control. It is the rhythm that runs beneath both rest and movement. The river does not need discipline to find the sea. Its path is shaped by the very landscape it flows through. Your life is the same. Every bend, every still pool, every rushing drop, all are guided by the larger terrain of existence. When you trust that, you realize that the flow never truly stops. It only changes tempo. Of course, there will still be days of confusion, days of fatigue. Enlightenment doesn't erase your humanity. It deepens it. The body still grows tired, the heart still feels loss, the mind still wanders. But now you see these not as obstacles, but as part of the music. There is no need to fight the downbeat, for it gives meaning to the rise that follows. When motivation seems to fade again, smile. It is simply another tide turning. Rest when you rest, move when you move. The universe breathes through both. Something beautiful happens once you stop chasing constant growth. Gratitude begins to appear. Not the gratitude that says thank you for this blessing, but the quiet awareness that every breath is a blessing. When you wake up and realize you need nothing, everything you touch feels sacred. You begin to notice how even the smallest things shimmer with significance. The sound of a kettle, the shadow of leaves, the warmth of sunlight through the window. These were always there, but the noise of striving kept you from hearing them. Now, without the noise, life itself becomes your meditation. And from that simplicity, creativity returns. True creativity is not born from effort, but from emptiness. A cup must be empty to be filled. When you stop trying to produce meaning, meaning pours in. You might paint again, write again, work again, but the energy behind it has changed. It is no longer a performance. It is communion. This is why great art, great love, and great wisdom all arise from surrender. They come from those who have ceased demanding that life makes sense. For when you stop forcing it to be extraordinary, it reveals that it always was. So, you see, motivation after awakening doesn't vanish forever. It transforms. It shifts from personal will to universal will, from I must to it moves. You become the instrument through which life plays its tune. Some days it's gentle, some days wild, but every note belongs. If you watch carefully, you will notice that everything around you already lives this way. The stars do not compete for brightness. Each shines where it is. The waves do not envy the tide. Each rises and falls in perfect timing. Even the silence between sounds is part of the song. To live like this is not to escape the world, but to see it clearly for the first time. You don't retreat from life, you melt into it. Work still happens, relationships still form, choices still appear, but they are lighter now, more fluid, less desperate. The strain is gone, and with that strain gone, a different kind of joy arises, not the explosive joy of victory, but the quiet joy of belonging. You realize you never had to conquer the world to find peace. You only had to stop fighting with it. In the end, What you called losing motivation was simply life changing its direction within you. You had been moving against the current for so long that when it finally turned you around, you mistook the ease for failure. But the current knows where it's going. It always has. So when you feel empty, remember, emptiness is not absence. It is space for new life to flow through. When you no longer rush to fill it, that is when the real work begins, the work that is done effortlessly, silently, perfectly. And one day, without planning it, you will notice yourself moving again, not because you decided to, but because the moment called for it. A friend will ask for help, a project will appear, a spark will rise. You will respond naturally, joyfully, without question. That is motivation after awakening action born from stillness, movement rooted in peace. The paradox of it all is this: when you no longer need a reason to live, life gives you 1,000 of them. When you stop searching for purpose, purpose reveals itself in every gesture, every breath, every sunrise. So do not be troubled if your fire seems dim. The flame has not died, it has become light. And that light needs no fuel, it shines by its own nature. Rest in that knowing, act when it moves you. Trust that the same intelligence that turns the stars and blooms the flowers is guiding you now. You have not fallen off the path. You have simply arrived where the path was always leading, here in this unhurried now.
We live in a society that worships control. From the moment we are born, we are taught that life is a series of problems to solve, challenges to overcome, and goals to achieve. We believe that the more we organize, plan, and hold tightly to the reins of our existence, the safer and happier we will become. And yet, as we grow older, a strange contradiction emerges. The more we try to control life, the more life seems to resist us. The harder we grip, the faster it slips away. It is almost comical when you think about it. Consider the way we structure our days, meticulously planning every hour, anticipating every potential outcome, and attempting to predict the unpredictable. We wake up each morning with a mental checklist, a blueprint for how the day should unfold. And yet, in a single moment, the unexpected appears: a traffic jam, a delayed message, a sudden illness, and our carefully laid plans unravel. Frustration arises, and we label this as bad luck, when in reality, it is merely life refusing to be tamed. Control, as it turns out, is not a mastery of reality. It is an illusion, a mental construct that gives the appearance of stability while masking the inherent unpredictability of existence. We cling to it because it feels safe. We cling because to acknowledge the lack of control is to confront uncertainty, and uncertainty is terrifying. Yet the paradox is that this very attempt to hold tightly creates tension, anxiety, and fear. The more we try to secure life, the more fragile it becomes. Think of a child learning to walk. The child takes their first tentative steps, falling repeatedly, scraping knees, and wobbling with each attempt. The parent watches, worried, perhaps even wanting to intervene and prevent the stumbles. Yet, the child learns not through control or interference, but through experience, through trial and error, through the very act of letting the body and the world interact freely. This is life's natural way. The parent cannot stop every fall, just as we cannot stop the events of the universe from unfolding. The river does not pause to ask your permission before it flows. The wind does not stop for you to adjust your plans. The sun rises and sets without concern for your schedules or desires. And yet, there is a strange harmony in all of this, a rhythm that persists regardless of our attempts to manipulate it. When we resist this flow, we experience suffering. When we surrender, we experience life. Consider the metaphor of the river. We often stand on the banks, attempting to push the water in a direction we desire, thinking that by shaping it, we can achieve our goals. And yet, the river will always carve its own path, indifferent to our efforts. To fight the current is exhausting, painful, and ultimately fruitless. But to enter the river, to move with it rather than against it, is to discover a freedom that cannot be grasped through force. This is the essence of the illusion of control. It is the belief that we can bend life to our will, when in reality life is a river and we are merely travelers. It is not only external events we attempt to control, but also our inner world. We strive to manage our thoughts, suppress our emotions, and shape our identities into something stable and permanent. Yet the mind is a flowing river as well, constantly moving, changing, and evolving. Attempting to hold a single thought, to cage a feeling, or to solidify a sense of self is like trying to trap water in your hands. It slips away, leaving only frustration and a sense of inadequacy. We must recognize that control is often a response to fear. We fear the unknown, the unpredictable, the unplanned. We fear that if we let go, we will lose ourselves, we will be swept away, we will fall into chaos. But the truth is that life is chaotic anyway. To cling is to resist the inevitable. To release is to embrace reality. There is a liberation in understanding that the need for control is optional, that it is a habit of the mind, not a requirement of existence. Let us consider the human desire for security. We work tirelessly to secure jobs, relationships, wealth, and possessions, believing that these external anchors will protect us from uncertainty. And yet, no matter how much we accumulate, the impermanence of life remains. Jobs end, relationships change, wealth can vanish, and bodies age. Security, when it is external, is always provisional. True stability is found not in controlling life, but in understanding its nature and participating fully in its flow. History is filled with examples of people who sought total control only to discover its futility. Emperors, kings, and rulers have tried to bend entire nations to their will, yet time, disease, and unforeseen events have always undermined their efforts. The lesson is clear. No matter how much power we accumulate, the universe remains unconcerned with our ambitions. The only freedom is to acknowledge this truth and live in accordance with it. This does not mean we become passive or indifferent. Participation in life is necessary, yet it is participation without attachment to outcomes. It is action guided by insight, not fear. It is engagement that is responsive rather than coercive, fluid rather than rigid. It is the difference between dancing with life and trying to wrestle it into submission. When we release the illusion of control, something profound happens. We become present. We notice the subtle textures of experience, the rustling of leaves, the warmth of sunlight, the sound of laughter. Life becomes vivid, alive, and immediate. We discover that the need to control often distracts us from the very experiences we seek to secure. By letting go, we are no longer trapped in anxiety about the future or regret over the past. We are free to encounter the world as it is, in all its beauty and unpredictability. And so, the first step toward freedom is awareness. Recognize the illusions you hold, the attempts at control that bind you, the fears that drive your grip. Observe them without judgment. Understand that these impulses are natural yet not necessary. Begin to loosen your hold, even in small ways. Let a conversation unfold without planning every word. Let a day pass without trying to predict every outcome. Let yourself feel fully without attempting to shape or suppress what arises. The journey is gradual. Letting go is not a single act, but a continuous practice, a dance between effort and surrender. Each moment offers a chance to release a little more, to trust a little more, to participate more fully in the flow of life. The illusion of control begins to dissolve, replaced by a quiet, steady presence. And in that presence, a freedom emerges, a freedom that cannot be given, taken, or lost, because it was never bound in the first place. To understand why letting go feels right, we must first understand what it means to let go. Letting go is often misunderstood as giving up, as surrendering in defeat, as stepping away from life. But in truth, letting go is the acknowledgement of reality. It is the recognition that life is not a problem to solve, but a mystery to be experienced. It is the act of opening our hands, not to relinquish life, but to allow life to flow through us, unimpeded and unshaped by fear. Imagine standing in a forest. The trees rise high, each one unique, bending in the wind without resistance. The birds sing without rehearsal. The stream moves without effort. You cannot command these things, and yet they exist in harmony. The forest does not try to control itself. It's simply island. In observing this, something awakens within you. You sense the ease, the rhythm, the natural order of things. And you begin to understand that the act of controlling is not necessary for existence. It is participation, awareness, and presence that matter. Letting go is not about abandoning responsibility. It is about releasing the belief that we can enforce outcomes or cling to permanence. It is the difference between holding life like a fist and holding it like a hand open to the sky. The open hand does not resist. It does not suffocate. It allows, it receives, it participates. When we practice this in our daily lives, we find that life no longer feels like a battle, but like a dance. Each movement, whether expected or unforeseen, is part of the rhythm. Consider our emotions. We often try to control feelings, to suppress anger, sadness, or fear, believing that these states are dangerous or undesirable. And yet, by resisting them, we amplify them. By letting go, by acknowledging and feeling without judgment, we discover that emotions are like waves. They rise, they crest, they fall. They do not define us. They move through us. Letting go in this context means allowing the wave to pass rather than clinging to it or trying to stop it. In relationships, letting go means allowing others to be themselves without attempting to mold them into our expectations. It means loving without possession, listening without trying to fix, and participating without attachment. The freedom that arises from this openness is profound. Relationships transform from battles of control into spaces of genuine connection, understanding, and mutual respect. The world often tempts us to control, to predict, to plan. Yet the universe operates according to principles far greater than our design. Storms will arrive, paths will change, and life will surprise us in ways we cannot anticipate. Letting go does not mean ignoring these events. It means meeting them with a mind unbound by fear, with a heart open to possibility. It is the conscious decision to engage fully while acknowledging the limits of our power. Why does letting go feel right? Because it aligns us with the natural order. When we stop fighting against what is, tension dissipates. The mind relaxes, the heart opens, and we experience a sense of spaciousness. There is a subtle joy in this surrender, a quiet delight that arises from the recognition that we are not in charge, and that this is not only acceptable, but beautiful. Imagine a bird learning to fly. It does not cling to the branch forever. At some point, it must leap, trusting its wings, trusting the air, trusting the process. Life, in this sense, is always asking us to take flight, to let go of the false safety of control, and to trust the journey. When we leap, we discover that the world supports us in ways we could not have imagined. We are carried, held, and guided by the flow of existence. Letting go also reveals the richness of the present moment. When we are no longer preoccupied with controlling the future or clinging to the past, we notice the subtleties of life, the laughter of a friend, the warmth of sunlight, the quiet rhythm of our own breath. Life, in all its simplicity and complexity, is fully present. And in being fully present, we discover a profound contentment that no amount of control can provide. The practice of letting go is continuous. It requires awareness, courage, and patience. Each day, we are presented with opportunities to release small grips, to loosen our hold, to trust more deeply. Over time, these small acts accumulate, transforming our experience of life. The illusion of control fades, replaced by a steady, gentle confidence in the flow of existence. In letting go, we find that life itself is enough. We do not need to manipulate, to engineer, or to dominate. The world is alive, vibrant, and unfolding in its own way. By surrendering the need to control, we participate in a dance far greater than ourselves. We discover freedom, joy, and an effortless presence that cannot be manufactured, only realized. So release. Release with trust, release with curiosity, release with love. Allow life to move through you, shaping and guiding you in ways your mind could never anticipate. In this letting go, you will find that you are not losing anything, you are gaining everything. A life lived fully, freely, and beautifully.
It is a curious thing, this tendency we all share, the urge to hold on to people, to hold on to ideas, to hold on to the stories we tell about who we are and what the world is. We clutch at memories of the past, as though replaying them might somehow make them last forever. We grip tightly at visions of the future, as if our grasp could bend time to obey our plans. And yet, in all this holding, we discover a strange weight. Instead of safety, it gives us a kind of suffocation. Instead of comfort, it makes us anxious, always fearing the moment when our grip might slip. Why do we hold on so desperately? It is because we have been taught that to let go is to lose. If I let go of this relationship, I will be abandoned. If I let go of this belief, I will be adrift. If I let go of control, everything will fall apart. And so, with clenched fists, we drag the baggage of yesterday into today and try to pack tomorrow into the same suitcase until we are exhausted under the sheer weight of it. But life, you see, is not meant to be carried like this. Life is a river, not a stone. It moves, it flows, it shifts. And when we try to grasp the current, we only end up with water slipping through our fingers. The tighter we hold, the more we realize we cannot truly hold at all. Consider for a moment the simple act of breathing. You breathe in, and then you must breathe out. If you try to only inhale, clinging to the air as though to lose it would mean to lose your life, you will suffocate. The very act of living requires release. It requires the rhythm of in and out, of taking and giving, of holding and letting go. And yet, when it comes to our attachments, we try to live as though we can only inhale, never exhale. The result is the same suffocation, but this time in our minds and our hearts. Look also at nature's trees. Each autumn, they shed their leaves, releasing what no longer serves them. They do not argue with the season. They do not cling to what has had its time. And because they let go, they are renewed. Spring comes and new leaves burst forth. Imagine if the tree resisted. Imagine if it gripped every leaf in panic, crying, "I cannot let this one go. It is mine. It defines me." What would happen? The tree would rot, unable to grow, unable to flourish. It is only in release that life finds its rhythm. But we, unlike the tree, tell ourselves stories. We imagine that if we let go, we will fall into emptiness. We imagine we are separate little beings standing against the tide of existence, and that if we do not hold on, the tide will wash us away. And so we resist, and we resist until the struggle becomes unbearable. Think of how we hold on to relationships that have already ended in spirit, afraid of the silence that might follow. We hold on to old identities. I am this kind of person. I cannot change. I must always live this way, even when the skin has grown too tight, like clothes from childhood that no longer fit. We hold on to resentments, to grievances, to past mistakes, dragging them behind us like heavy stones, all the while wondering why we feel so tired. But the truth is, letting go is not the opposite of love, nor the opposite of care. To let go is not to reject. It is to recognize the natural movement of things, just as waves rise and fall, just as days begin and end, just as lives appear and dissolve, so too does every form, every moment, follow the rhythm of arising and passing. To resist this rhythm is to resist life itself. It is like trying to stop a river with your hands. You may feel, for a brief instant, that you are succeeding, but soon the current pushes past, stronger than your grip, indifferent to your effort. And then you are left exhausted while the river flows on. But why do we resist so fiercely? Because we mistake holding for control. We believe that if we grip tightly enough, we can preserve what we love, secure what we fear to lose, or shape the future to our design. And yet, have you noticed? The things we cling to most fiercely are often the very ones that slip away. Think of the lover smothered by another's insecurity, who leaves not because of lack of love, but because they cannot breathe under the grip. Think of the person so obsessed with controlling every detail of their life that they leave no room for surprise, no room for spontaneity, and so they find themselves trapped in the very order they desired. Think of the one who cannot release the memory of a wound, and so carries it, reliving the pain again and again, as though it were happening now. In all of this, the fear of letting go is the fear of death in miniature. For to let go is to allow something to end, to allow a moment to pass, a form to dissolve, a self to change. And because we fear the great death, the dissolution of our own body, our own ego, we fear all the little deaths along the way. We imagine that by holding on, we can resist the great tide, keep ourselves intact, but in truth, it is the clinging that breaks us. You may notice this in the smallest of things. Try to hold water in a tight fist, and it escapes. Hold it gently, with an open palm, and it rests with you for a while. Try to clutch at love, and it suffocates. Let it breathe, and it grows. Try to force your life into rigid certainty, and it rebels. Allow it to flow, and it carries you further than you could have planned. So the problem is not that life takes things away. The problem is that we refuse to see that life is always taking and giving, always flowing, always changing. To demand permanence in a world of movement is to fight against the very essence of what is. The suffering of holding on is not only in the loss itself, but in the constant tension, the vigilance, the anxiety of guarding what cannot be guarded. Like a man clutching a rope that is fraying in his hands, we exhaust ourselves trying to prevent the inevitable. And in doing so, we miss the beauty of what is still here, still alive, still present. And so, you may notice, fear grows not from reality itself, but from the stories we weave. If I let this go, I will be nothing. If I release control, life will collapse. These are shadows of thought, not truths. For in fact, you are already letting go in every moment. You let go of each breath, or you would die. You let go of each moment, or time would freeze. You let go of sleep each morning, or the day could never begin. Letting go is already the rhythm of your being. You cannot resist it forever. You can only blind yourself to it. The great paradox is that by clinging, you do not preserve life, you smother it. By resisting change, you do not secure safety, you create fear. By holding on, you do not keep things as they are, you hasten their decay. And so, we must see clearly, the fear of letting go is born from an illusion, the illusion that we are separate from the flow, that life is something happening to us rather than as us. But once you see that you are the river itself, the need to clutch at each drop begins to fade. The beginning of wisdom is to see the cost of holding on, to see that it is not safety, but weight, not love, but suffocation, not freedom, but prison. Only when this is seen can the heart begin to loosen its grip. And so, As you sit here listening, perhaps you can feel in your own life what it is you are clutching. Perhaps a person, perhaps a story, perhaps an image of yourself. Feel the tension of it, the way it weighs upon you. Notice that it is not the thing itself that weighs you down, but the clinging. And see, if only for a moment, that there may be another way. If holding on binds us in tension, then letting go is the beginning of freedom. Yet, many hear this and immediately recoil. If I let go, won't I lose everything? Won't life spin into chaos? Won't I fall into nothingness? But you see, this is the illusion. For letting go does not mean falling into emptiness, it means falling into life. It means aligning yourself with the rhythm that has been carrying you all along. Think again of breathing. You let go of the breath not to die, but to live. The release makes room for the next inhalation, the next renewal. Imagine if you refuse to exhale, clinging desperately to the air as though your survival depended upon it. You would suffocate. The irony is clear. You live because you let go, again and again. This rhythm of release is everywhere. The trees let go of their leaves so that new growth may appear. The snake sheds its skin, or else it cannot expand. The earth itself shifts, quakes, moves, so that new mountains may rise, new valleys may form. To let go is not a failure of life, but its very condition. Now, notice what happens in you when you release. Perhaps you have experienced it already. You cling to some resentment, some injury from the past. You replay it, you nurse it, you rehearse the words you should have said, and then, one day, perhaps out of exhaustion, you let it go. And what do you feel? Relief, lightness. The world, unchanged in its outer form, suddenly appears brighter. The sky seems wider, the air easier to breathe. Nothing has changed but the grip of your hand, and in that small gesture, everything is transformed. So letting go is not loss, but transformation. It is not the end of love, but the beginning of freedom within love. For when you hold someone too tightly, you do not love them, you possess them. And possession strangles. To love is to let another be, to allow them the freedom of their own movement, their own becoming. And when you grant this, you discover something extraordinary, that love does not vanish when released. It grows, it deepens, it breathes. Letting go of control is much the same. You may imagine that unless you manage every detail, life will collapse into disorder. But in truth, life is already happening without your command. Your heart beats without your orders, your cells divide, your blood flows, your breath moves, the earth spins, the stars burn, all without your intervention. Control is a story, a game we play with ourselves. Life does not wait for your instructions. So what happens when you release this compulsion to control? At first, fear, because the ego imagines it is the master, and to surrender is to die. But beneath that fear is a discovery that life carries you more gracefully than you could ever carry yourself. Like a swimmer who finally stops thrashing and allows the water to hold them, you realize you are buoyant. You do not sink into chaos. You float into harmony. Now, letting go does not mean apathy. It does not mean turning your back on life or abandoning care. It means participating without clinging, engaging without grasping. It is like dancing with a partner. If you clutch at them, the dance is stiff and awkward. If you collapse and refuse to move, the dance cannot happen at all. But if you allow, give and take, guiding and yielding, the dance becomes alive, spontaneous, free. So it is with life. You are not to be a puppet, dragged helplessly, nor are you to be a tyrant, forcing every step. You are to be a dancer, moving with the rhythm, listening, responding, trusting. This is what the Chinese call wu wei, not forcing, not straining, but moving with the grain of the universe. Now, one of the greatest fears in letting go is the fear of death. We cling to life, imagining that if we grip hard enough, we can stave off the inevitable. But death is not the enemy. Death is the great letting go, and without it, life would not be. Just as sleep is necessary to renew the body, so death renews the cycle of existence. The leaf falls, but the tree lives on. The wave dissolves, but the ocean remains. And so, when you let go in small ways of a thought, of a grievance, of a fear, you are practicing the art of dying. You are rehearsing the great surrender that will one day come to us all. And in practicing it, you discover that death is not destruction, but renewal. What falls away makes room for what is to come. Even time itself teaches this. You cannot cling to a single moment. Try as you may to preserve it, the moment passes. The laughter fades, the embrace ends, the sunset gives way to night. And yet, this is not a tragedy, for the very passing makes room for what is next. If the day did not end, the night could not begin. If the note did not fade, the song could not continue. Life is not in the holding of one instant, but in the continuous flow from one to another. So, letting go is not abandonment. It is participation in the rhythm of existence. It is to see that you are not separate from the flow, standing against it, but the flow itself. You are not the hand clutching at the river. You are the river. And once this is seen, the fear begins to loosen. Now, notice in your own life where this might be so. Perhaps there is a person you cannot release, even though the time has passed. Perhaps there is a version of yourself you cling to, though it no longer fits. Perhaps there is a fear you rehearse endlessly, as if preparing for it could prevent it. And see, just for a moment, what it would feel like to open your hand, not to push it away, not to destroy it, but simply to release. Feel the lightness in that image, the freedom. This is the invitation of letting go. And here is the curious thing. When you let go, what is real does not vanish. Love remains, but it is free. The self remains, but it is flexible. Life remains, but it is lighter. What vanishes is the tension, the anxiety, the weight of clutching at shadows. You lose nothing but your chains. So the practice of letting go is not about throwing life away, but about finally receiving it. For as long as your hands are clenched, they cannot receive. Only the open hand can be filled. Only the relaxed heart can feel joy. Only the surrendered mind can discover peace. This is why the sages and mystics, again and again, spoke of surrender, not as defeat, but as liberation, not as loss, but as gain. To surrender is to see that you were never in control to begin with, and that this is not bad news, but the best news possible. For it means you are carried, sustained, supported by something far greater than the little I you believed yourself to be. So when you are afraid of letting go, remember this: you have been letting go all along. Each breath, each moment, each night's sleep, you have already practiced surrender countless times, and each time, life has continued. The fear is a story, not a reality. And when you release even a little, you discover the great secret. Life holds you. The ocean does not drop its waves. The sky does not abandon its clouds. The earth does not reject its children. You belong always. And letting go is the way you remember it. So let yourself soften. Let yourself breathe. Let the clenched fist open. The guarded heart relax. The worried mind fall silent. You will not fall into nothingness. You will fall into everything. For letting go is not the end. It is the beginning of freedom. There is a strange illusion at the heart of modern life, a quiet assumption that something is wrong with you. It hides in the self-help books, in the words of well-meaning friends, even in the silence of your own thoughts. You are told that you must fix yourself, improve yourself, heal yourself, as if being alive was some sort of wound. But what if that isn't true? What if the very idea that you are broken is the reason you feel incomplete? The notion of healing suggests that there exists an ideal version of you somewhere ahead in time, a self without pain, without confusion, without flaws. You imagine that if you can just reach that person, then you'll finally be free. And so you set off on a long journey of correction, trying to repair what you believe life has damaged. But in chasing this image of perfection, you overlook the simple truth that there has never been anything fundamentally wrong with you to begin with. Think of a wave rising and falling in the ocean. At no point in its motion is it less ocean than before. Whether it crashes wildly on the rocks or stretches out gently across the shore, it remains exactly what it always was, the sea in temporary form. You are no different. Your confusion, your sadness, your longing, all of it is the motion of life expressing itself through you. There is nothing to fix because there was never a mistake. The pain you feel is not proof of brokenness, but proof of being alive. Healing, as the world describes it, often becomes a new kind of suffering. You start believing that every difficult emotion, every memory, every shadow must be scrubbed away before you can finally rest. You begin to measure your worth by how healed you appear to be. But the truth is, this endless self-repair keeps you trapped in the same cycle you are trying to escape. You keep searching for peace by rejecting the parts of yourself that need peace most. The mind is clever at disguising this pursuit. It calls it growth, progress, evolution, anything to avoid stillness. Yet the very nature of life is already movement. You don't need to make yourself flow. You only need to stop damming the river. What you call healing is often resistance in disguise, a subtle refusal to feel what is already asking to be felt. But feeling is the medicine. Awareness is the cure. Look closely at your moments of greatest pain. Beneath the surface, you'll see that pain only becomes unbearable when you begin to fight it. The wound itself is not the enemy. The resistance to it is. The moment you soften into what is even for a second, the weight begins to shift. The pain doesn't always vanish, but your relationship to it transforms. It ceases to define you. You begin to sense that what you are cannot be hurt by what you experience. You, the awareness, are untouched. Imagine a mirror reflecting everything before it: light, shadow, beauty, decay, yet remaining unchanged. The mirror does not heal the images it reflects. It doesn't cling to them or reject them. It simply holds them until they fade, and in doing so, it reveals its own unbroken nature. This is what you are, not the reflections, not the stories, not the scars. You are the space in which they come and go. We've been taught that healing is about becoming someone better, but real healing, if we can even call it that, is not about improvement. It's about seeing that nothing needed improvement in the first place. It's the realization that the self you thought was damaged was only ever a thought. The deeper self, the one that watches, the one that breathes you, has never been harmed. But the ego doesn't like this truth. It thrives on problems to solve. Without something to fix, it begins to lose its purpose. So it invents endless tasks: heal this, transcend that, awaken to something new. The more you chase completion, the more distant it feels, because the chaser and the chased are the same illusion. The very effort to become whole keeps you from recognizing that you already are. The paradox of awakening is that it doesn't happen through effort, but through surrender. It happens the moment you stop trying to become what you already are. This is why so many spiritual seekers spend years meditating, journaling, or retreating, only to discover that the peace they were looking for was always present, hidden beneath the noise of their own striving. You may remember moments in your life when this truth flashed through. Perhaps it was after heartbreak, or loss, or exhaustion, when all your attempts to control had failed. And for a brief instant, You simply gave up. In that surrender, there was peace. Not because the pain was gone, but because the struggle was. The moment you stopped demanding that life be different, life revealed its own quiet perfection. This doesn't mean you will never suffer again. It means you stop turning suffering into identity. You stop calling yourself the wound. You allow feelings to rise and fall without believing they define who you are. The tears, the laughter, the confusion, all are waves passing through the same vastness. The ocean doesn't apologize for its storms. It knows they are part of its rhythm. If you can begin to see yourself in this way, you realize that the idea of healing was never about fixing yourself. It was life's way of guiding you back into wholeness, not through repair, but through remembrance. You begin to understand that even your mistakes were not detours, but doorways. Every broken thing was simply an opening to what was whole all along. You don't need to heal to be whole, because you have never been separate from the whole. The mind invented separation and then built an industry of healing to bridge the gap. But the gap was imaginary. The moment you see that, the chase ends. You realize that what you were trying to fix was a dream. When you rest in this awareness, healing happens naturally, but not in the way you imagined. You don't become perfect, you become real. You don't become pure, you become whole, which means nothing is left out. Your pain belongs, your joy belongs, even your confusion belongs. Wholeness is not the absence of fragmentation. It is the recognition that even fragmentation is part of the whole. The seed does not heal its shell by breaking it. The shell must crack for the life within to emerge. So too, your struggles are not flaws to fix, but cracks through which your light escapes. Every time you allow yourself to feel what you've been avoiding, every time you stop fighting the messiness of being human, you grow closer to the truth that you were never broken, only unfolding. The end of seeking is not found in perfection, but in presence. The peace you long for is not waiting at the end of your healing journey. It is here, quietly breathing beneath all your attempts to find it. The more you relax into that truth, the more life begins to feel like coming home. And perhaps, for the first time, you realize that you were never meant to heal from life, but to live it fully, to feel it all, to let it move through you, and to see that every moment, no matter how painful, is part of something perfectly whole. When you stop trying to heal, something unexpected happens. Life begins to breathe through you again. The air feels lighter, sounds become sharper, and even your pain takes on a kind of beauty. You realize that what you once called brokenness was not an obstacle to living, but part of what made living possible. The cracks in your heart were never flaws, they were openings through which tenderness could enter. Without them, you would never have known compassion, or depth, or love. The irony is that the more you try to escape pain, the more it lingers. But when you stop running, when you sit quietly and allow yourself to feel exactly what is here, the pain begins to unfold into something else. It turns from a weight into warmth, from tension into tenderness. You realize it was never trying to hurt you. It was trying to speak to you. Every ache in your chest, every tear you've ever shed was life's way of saying, look here, pay attention. There's something sacred beneath this. Wholeness is not an achievement. It is the natural state of awareness before you divide it into categories, before you call one feeling good and another bad, one experience spiritual and another mundane. The moment you stop dividing, you see that all of it belongs. The sadness, the joy, the confusion, the clarity, they are all faces of the same mystery. To call one divine and the other human is to forget that both are made of the same light. For years, you may have thought of healing as a process of becoming, of getting somewhere, becoming wiser, more peaceful, more enlightened. But the truth is that becoming never ends. You can always imagine a better version of yourself. You can always picture a higher state, a deeper calm, a more spiritual you. And so you remain on the treadmill of transformation, chasing an image that keeps shifting just beyond your reach. Freedom begins when you see that you don't need to become anything at all. You can rest in what already is. This resting is not laziness. It is the greatest courage there is, the courage to stop striving in a world that worships progress. It is an act of rebellion against the noise that tells you that you are not enough. When you stop trying to be enough, you find that enoughness has been your nature all along. It was the striving itself that made you forget. The idea of healing implies a return to some original wholeness, but that wholeness never left. What left was your awareness of it. Like clouds drifting across the sky, your thoughts, traumas, and desires temporarily obscured the light. But the light was always there, quietly shining behind everything. You don't need to chase it. You only need to stop fighting the clouds. There is a quiet intelligence in life that is constantly moving toward balance. You see it in nature. A tree grows toward the light. A river carves its way toward the sea. Nothing forces it to. It simply happens. Your body knows how to heal a wound without your instruction. Your breath continues even as you sleep. The same intelligence that keeps the stars burning also keeps your heart beating. To trust this is to stop managing existence as if it depended on you. It never did. When you rest in this trust, the need to heal begins to dissolve. Because the one who thought it needed healing, the small self, the imagined center, was only ever a passing thought. It was never real. You realize that awareness itself was never wounded, never stained, never in danger. It has watched every rise and fall of emotion with perfect stillness, and that awareness is what you are. What does it mean, then, to live without trying to heal? It means to live as life lives, fluidly, honestly, without resistance. It means to let joy and sorrow move through you without clinging to either. It means to allow every experience to touch you fully and pass through, knowing that you lose nothing by letting go. You don't have to protect yourself from life. You only need to participate in it. Perhaps you've noticed that your most profound moments of healing have come not through effort, but through surrender. It wasn't the therapy, the book, or the retreat that freed you, but the quiet moment afterward, when you finally let yourself rest. When you stopped trying to make sense of everything and simply allowed yourself to be, that peace was not something you created. It was what remained when the struggle stopped. Real healing, if we must use the word, is not about repairing the past. It is about releasing the need for a different one. It is about forgiving the story that says things should have happened another way. When you truly accept what has been, not as resignation, but as recognition, you discover that nothing needs forgiveness, because nothing was ever wrong. The pain that shaped you also awakened you. The loss that hurt you also opened you. Life has been your greatest teacher all along. To live this way is to live without a center. It is to be free from the endless self-concern that says, how am I doing? Am I better yet? Am I enough yet? When you let that question fall away, what's left is pure being, no comparison, no measure, no judgment. Just this moment, alive and unrepeatable. Just the sound of breath moving in and out, the light shifting on the wall, the quiet pulse of existence itself. You realize that healing was never a destination. It was the path you were already walking without knowing it. The human tendency is to look for closure, to imagine an endpoint, a day when all the pieces finally fit. But life is not a puzzle to complete. It is an ocean, and you are its movement. Waves do not heal from crashing. They were never broken by it. The rise and fall is the motion of the sea expressing itself. The moment you understand this, you stop asking the wave to be still. You stop asking yourself to be fixed. Even suffering, when seen clearly, becomes sacred. It deepens your capacity for love. It humbles your pride. It connects you with others who have suffered too. Pain opens the door to empathy. Through it, you realize that all beings share the same longing to be seen, to be accepted, to be allowed to exist as they are. And in recognizing that the distance between you and the world begins to dissolve, you see that you are not healing alone, you are remembering together. Life is not waiting for you to perfect yourself before it begins. It has been happening all along, through every mistake and every triumph, through every heartbreak and every joy. To live as wholeness is to live without the future tense, to stop postponing peace until some later moment. Life is not waiting for you to perfect yourself before it begins. It has been happening all along, through every mistake and every triumph, through every heartbreak and every joy. To live as wholeness is to live without the future tense, to stop postponing peace until some later moment. The wholeness you seek does not exist somewhere ahead. It is this very breath, this heartbeat, this awareness hearing these words now. When you look back someday, you will see that every step, even the ones that felt lost, led you here. The wrong turns, the breakdowns, the moments you thought you had failed, they were not detours but directions. Each one softened you, shaped you, prepared you for the moment you could finally stop. And in that stopping, you will find that you have arrived at what was never absent. The invitation of life is not to become pure, but to become whole. And wholeness includes everything: the joy, the grief, the confusion, the laughter, even the longing to be whole. When you can hold all of that without resistance, when you can see yourself as both the wound and the healer, both the ocean and the wave, something beautiful happens. The struggle ends not because you have conquered it, but because you see that it was never separate from peace. To live without needing to heal is to live as the open sky, vast enough for every storm, untouched by every cloud. You stop fearing the weather of your own mind. You stop waiting for the rain to pass before you dance. You realize that the rain was part of the dance all along. So perhaps the most radical thing you can do is nothing to sit quietly in your own being and allow life to be exactly as it is. In that stillness, you may notice that you no longer crave healing because you no longer believe in your own brokenness. The journey has come full circle. What you were searching for was never missing. It was the one who was searching. You do not need to heal to be whole. You only need to remember that you already are.
At a certain point, many people experience something strange they didn't see coming. Things that once delighted them, activities that once filled them with enthusiasm and pleasure, suddenly seem to lose their savor. The music doesn't move them anymore. The food doesn't taste as it used to. The company of friends feels hollow. Even the pursuits they once considered their greatest passions, reading, walking in nature, creating things, all of it becomes somehow flat, colorless, without the spark that once made life feel worth living. And naturally, when this happens, people become frightened. They think something has gone terribly wrong. They believe they've become depressed, that they're ill, that there's some chemical imbalance in their brain that needs correcting, or they think they've simply become cynical, jaded, that life has worn them down and they've lost their capacity for joy. And they ask themselves, with genuine desperation, what's happened to me? Why can't I feel anything anymore? But what if I told you that this loss of joy, this apparent flatness of experience, is not necessarily a problem at all? What if this state that seems like death is actually a kind of birth? What if the disappearance of joy as you knew it is simply making room for something else, something you haven't yet recognized, because you're still looking for the old feelings, the old excitements, the old ways of being moved? Let me explain what I mean. You see, most of what we call joy or pleasure in ordinary life is really a kind of relief. It's the satisfaction of a want, the filling of a lack, the scratching of an itch. You're hungry, and then you eat, and there's pleasure in that. But notice the pleasure depends on the hunger. Without the hunger, the eating is just mechanical. You're lonely, and then someone pays attention to you, and there's joy in that. But the joy depends on the loneliness. Without the sense of lack, the attention doesn't move you. This is what the Buddha was pointing at when he said that life is suffering, or more accurately, that life is unsatisfactoriness. Not that everything is miserable, but that this constant cycle of wanting and getting, of lacking and filling, of itching and scratching, is inherently unstable. It's based on a sense of incompleteness, of something missing, of not being quite enough as you are. And so we spend our lives chasing these little moments of relief, these brief satisfactions. When a want is filled, we call this happiness, we call this joy. But it's really just the temporary cessation of discomfort. It's like someone hitting you on the head with a hammer and then stopping, and you feel relieved, and you call that relief pleasure. But the question nobody asks is, why were you being hit with a hammer in the first place? Now, what happens to some people, and this is what's happening to you if you're experiencing this loss of joy, is that they begin to see through this game. They begin to recognize that all these pleasures they've been chasing are really just escapes from discomfort. And once you see this, once you really understand it, the old joys don't work anymore. The scratching doesn't satisfy the itch because you've realized that you're creating the itch in order to enjoy the scratching. It's like a drug addict who takes a drug to feel good, but the drug itself creates the need for more of the drug. The relief the addict gets from taking the drug is really just the temporary cessation of the withdrawal symptoms caused by the drug itself. Once you see this pattern, the whole thing collapses. The pleasure loses its appeal because you've seen through it. This is what's happened to you. You've seen through the game of seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. You've recognized, perhaps not intellectually, but in your bones, that all these joys you were pursuing were really just elaborate ways of running away from yourself, from the present moment, from what simply is. And so now you're left in this strange state. The old pleasures don't work. The old excitements don't excite. You've lost your capacity to be distracted, to be taken out of yourself by experiences and sensations. And this feels like death. It feels like something essential has been taken from you. Like you've become a ghost, going through the motions of life but not really living it. But here's what you must understand. This state is not an end. It's a transition. It's the space between the old way of experiencing life and a new way that you haven't discovered yet. You're in the gap, and the gap is terrifying because there's nothing to hold on to. The old structures have collapsed, but the new hasn't yet emerged. Let me give you an analogy. Imagine you've been living your whole life in a room lit by candles. The candlelight creates all these interesting shadows on the walls, dancing shapes that fascinate you. You spend your time watching the shadows, being entertained by them, finding meaning in their patterns. This is like the ordinary joys of life. They're real enough in their way, but they're really just flickering shadows created by the limited light source. Now, what happens if someone opens a door and bright daylight streams in? At first, the light is so bright it's almost painful. You can't see anything clearly. Everything is washed out. And all those fascinating shadows that kept you entertained, they've disappeared, vanished in the bright light. And you might think, this is terrible. I've lost all the interesting patterns. Everything's become bland and featureless. But you're not seeing clearly yet. Your eyes haven't adjusted to the daylight. Once they do, you'll realize that you haven't lost anything. You've gained everything. You're seeing reality directly now, not just its shadows. And this direct seeing is so much richer, so much more real than the shadow play you were watching before. But it's a different kind of richness. It doesn't have the same quality as the shadows. It's not entertainment. It's something else entirely. This is what's happening when nothing brings you joy anymore. The old shadow play has stopped working, but you haven't yet learned to see in the daylight. You're in that transitional period where the old is gone, but the new isn't yet clear. And this period can last quite a while. It's not something you can rush. Your eyes must adjust at their own pace. Now, the usual response to this state is to try desperately to get the old joys back. People throw themselves into new hobbies, new relationships, new experiences, hoping to rekindle that spark. Or they turn to stronger stimulations, louder music, more intense sensations, more dramatic experiences, like someone whose taste buds have become dulled, trying hotter and hotter spices to feel something, anything. But this doesn't work. In fact, it makes things worse. Because what's really needed is not more stimulation, but less. What's needed is to stop running, stop seeking, Stop trying to fill the emptiness with experiences and sensations. What's needed is to simply be with what is, without trying to make it into something else. And here's the extraordinary thing that happens when you do this. When you stop trying to manufacture joy, you discover that there's something present that was always there, but that you never noticed because you were too busy chasing after pleasures. It's not exactly joy in the old sense. It's more like an okayness, a fundamental sense that everything is all right exactly as it is. Not that everything is perfect or pleasurable, but that it's complete. It's enough. It doesn't need anything added to it. The old joys were based on contrast. Good times versus bad times. Pleasure versus pain. Excitement versus boredom. But this new state, this okayness, doesn't depend on contrast. It's there all the time, whether things are going well or poorly, whether you're comfortable or uncomfortable, whether you're experiencing pleasure or pain. It's like discovering that you've been living in a house your whole life, rushing from room to room looking for something, and then suddenly realizing that what you were looking for was the house itself. It was there all along. You were standing in it. You are it. But you couldn't see it because you were too busy searching. Now, I must warn you about something. When I describe this state as an okayness or a fundamental sense that everything is all right, you might think this sounds rather dull. You might think, is that all there is? Just being okay with things? That doesn't sound very exciting. And you're right, it's not exciting in the way the old pleasures were exciting. It doesn't have that quality of peak experience, of highs and lows, of drama and intensity. But here's what you must understand. Excitement is exhausting. Drama is exhausting. The constant pursuit of peak experiences is exhausting. You can't live at that pitch all the time. What happens is that you have these brief moments of intensity and then long periods of deflation while you wait for the next high. The lows get lower and lower, and you need stronger and stronger stimuli to achieve the same highs. This is the addict's pattern, and most people are addicted to experience, to sensation, to the drama of their own lives. They're constantly generating problems so they can solve them, creating tension so they can release them, stirring up emotions so they can feel alive, and they call this joy, but it's really just agitation. What you've lost when nothing brings you joy anymore is your addiction to this pattern. And like any addict going through withdrawal, you feel terrible. You feel empty, flat, dead. But what you're really experiencing is the absence of agitation. And at first, the absence of agitation feels like death because you've been agitated for so long that you've forgotten what it's like to simply be at rest. Let me tell you about a man I knew once. He was tremendously energetic, always doing something, always pursuing some new project or pleasure. He traveled constantly, collected experiences like some people collect stamps, was always reading, always learning, always seeking out new sensations. And he was proud of this. He thought he was really living, squeezing every drop out of life. Then something happened, I don't know exactly what, perhaps just the accumulation of years, and he lost his enthusiasm. All those activities that had seemed so important suddenly seemed pointless. Travel bored him. Books couldn't hold his attention. Food all tasted the same. And he became quite depressed about this. He thought his life was over, that he'd become old and worn out. But then, after some time in this state, something shifted. He told me that one day he was sitting in his garden, doing nothing in particular, just sitting there. And he suddenly realized that he was completely content. Not excited, not entertained, just simply content, present, here. And he understood that all his previous rushing around had been a kind of running away. He'd been afraid of this simple being here, so he'd filled his life with constant activity and stimulation to avoid it. And now that all the activity had dropped away, he'd discovered what he'd been running from, just this moment, this breath, this being alive. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything. But it wasn't exciting or dramatic, so his mind had dismissed it as nothing, as emptiness, as death. Only when he stopped demanding that life be exciting did he discover that life is extraordinary in its ordinariness. This is what I'm trying to point you toward. When nothing brings you joy anymore in the old way, you're being invited to discover a different quality of experience. not the ups and downs of pleasure and pain, but something more subtle, more constant, more fundamental. But you can't force this discovery. You can't make it happen. In fact, trying to make it happen is exactly what prevents it. It's like trying to fall asleep. The harder you try, the more wakeful you become. You have to give up trying. You have to surrender to not knowing, to not feeling, to this apparent emptiness. And this is perhaps the most difficult thing anyone can be asked to do. Because we're so afraid of emptiness. We think emptiness is death, is meaninglessness, is the absence of life. But actually, emptiness is potential. It's the space in which something new can emerge. As long as you're full of seeking and striving and trying to recapture old joys, there's no room for anything new. You must become empty. Not empty in a negative sense, but empty like a bowl is empty, empty so it can receive, empty so it can be filled. But not filled with the old things, filled with something you don't yet have a name for. Now, I know this is not what you wanted to hear. You wanted me to tell you how to get your joy back, how to feel things again the way you used to. But I can't tell you that, because what you're experiencing is not a problem to be solved. It's a transition to be gone through, like a caterpillar dissolving in the cocoon before it becomes a butterfly. The caterpillar is finished. It can't go back to being a happy caterpillar, but it's not yet a butterfly. It's just mush. And if the mush could think, it would probably be quite distressed about its condition. You're the mush right now. And I'm telling you, this is not a mistake. This is the process. Stay with it. Don't try to escape from it. Don't try to manufacture fake joys to fill the emptiness. Just be with what is. Be with the flatness, the colorlessness, the apparent meaninglessness. Let it be exactly as it is without trying to fix it or understand it or make it into something else. And gradually, not according to your timetable, but in its own time, something will shift. Not back to the old way, but forward into something new. A new way of experiencing life that doesn't depend on contrast, that doesn't require stimulation, that finds sufficiency in the bare fact of existing. This is what the mystics have always pointed to. Not some ecstatic state of constant bliss that's just another form of the old seeking, but a deep okayness that persists through all states, pleasant and unpleasant alike. A recognition that you are, in the deepest sense, all right, not because everything in your life is going well, but because your life, your existence, is fundamentally complete, exactly as it is. The old joys were like trying to improve a sunset by throwing more colors at it. The new recognition is that the sunset is already perfect, doesn't need improvement, doesn't need anything added to it or taken away from it. It's complete in itself, and so are you. And so is this moment. And so is your life, even in this seemingly joyless state. But I must emphasize again, you cannot make this recognition happen. You cannot achieve this state. Any effort to get there pushes it away, because effort implies that something is lacking, that you're not already complete. The recognition can only come when you stop trying, when you give up, when you surrender completely to what is. And even then, it may not come, or it may come and go, or it may come in such a subtle way that you don't even notice it at first. It's not dramatic. It's not exciting. It doesn't feel like you thought enlightenment would feel. It's more like coming home, like taking off tight shoes, like exhaling after holding your breath too long. So what do you do in the meantime, while you're in this state where nothing brings joy? You do what needs to be done. You brush your teeth, you eat your meals, you go about your daily business. But you do it without the expectation that these activities should make you happy. You do them simply because they're what's here to be done, not with resignation or bitterness, but with a kind of neutral acceptance. And you watch. You observe this state you're in without judging it, without trying to change it. You become interested in it, curious about it, not in a clinical way, but with the kind of interest you might have in watching clouds move across the sky. Just watching, without needing the clouds to be different than they are. And, most importantly, you stop comparing. Stop comparing your current state with how you used to feel. Stop comparing yourself with people who seem to be having a good time. Stop comparing this moment with some imagined future moment when everything will be better. Just be here, now, with what is. This is not resignation. It's not giving up. It's actually the opposite. It's fully showing up for your life as it actually is, rather than constantly wishing it were different. And paradoxically, it's only when you stop wishing things were different that anything can truly change. Because what's blocking the new experience, the new way of being, is your insistence that things should be like they were before. Your nostalgia for the old joys, your memory of how things used to feel, your expectation that life should return to that familiar pattern, all of this is preventing you from seeing what's actually here now. Let me give you one final thought. Perhaps the reason nothing brings you joy anymore is that you've outgrown joy as you knew it. Perhaps you've become too big for those small pleasures, too deep for those shallow satisfactions. Not because you're better than other people, but simply because your consciousness has expanded and the old containers can no longer hold what you've become. A child is delighted by candy. A young person is thrilled by romance and adventure. A mature person finds satisfaction in accomplishment and recognition. But there comes a point, for some people, when all of these things are seen through, when they're recognized as temporary, conditional, ultimately unsatisfying. And then what? Then you're thrown back on existence itself, on the bare fact of being alive, of being conscious, of being here. And this can seem like nothing at all compared to the excitement of candy and romance and accomplishment. But actually, it's everything. It's the ground from which all those other things arose. It's what was there before you learned to seek pleasure and avoid pain. It's what remains when all the seeking stops. And it's not nothing. It's not emptiness in the negative sense. It's fullness. It's wholeness. It's completion. But it's so simple, so ordinary, so undramatic that the mind overlooks it constantly, always seeking something more exciting, more stimulating, more special. What you're being asked to discover is that there is nothing more special than this moment, this breath, this simple fact of being alive. Not because it makes you feel good, not because it's pleasurable, but because it's real. It's what is. And what is enough. It's always been enough. You just forgot for a while. So when nothing brings you joy anymore, don't despair. You haven't lost your capacity for feeling. You've lost your addiction to a particular kind of feeling. And in that loss, there's an opening, a possibility, a doorway into a different way of being human. Walk through that doorway.